I have a girl I see a lot of in California, an actress, who is supposed to be an intellectual, which means that she licks envelopes for the Democratic Party, but that's it, right? I passed for bright. So, play on words. Anyway, this girl, she says to me, every time I start to talk about Mrs. Kennedy in all the magazines, she says to me, well, what do you want her to do? Like that. I say, well, why is she shopping for wallpaper? And, why is she on the front of the Ladies' Home Journal? She says, what do you want her to do? Very hostile. So I say, well, I was kind of hoping, since I've been given a choice, I was kind of hoping that Mrs. Kennedy might relieve Mrs. Roosevelt, who is 77 and should not be driving tractors to Havana. Now, I have to tell you, we have a whole rash of new magazines in America. Show Business Illustrated, which is Playboy's conscience. They're trying to make it without nudity. And because Playboy, they don't believe it. They think they're making it on their fiction. We know, of course, that Northwestern sells 7 times as many Playboys as copies of Time. And they have, there's that girl in the middle of Playboy, that you can remove and assemble, I think, right? But can you live with her? That's the question. Well, I don't know. It depends on your needs. I didn't find out anything about my needs. 7 years in a university, I only know about group needs. Isn't that interesting? I'll have to work that out later. Enough of that. Now, back to the girls all around me are training to be social workers, though, so there'll be a return of this training. Now, let's see. So we have Show Business Illustrated, then we have Show. Then a lot of magazines did what they call a facelifting, like the Saturday Evening Post, Life, Look, and the Ladies' Home Journal. Ladies' Home Journal has to do with us tonight. I'll tell you why. I wrote an article for them. I have to tell you the way this happened. This is very weird. I was at home. They were finishing the house, and they were putting in the high-fidelity unit. I remember this very well. And we were putting Bozak 310 speakers in the ceiling. There are 11 speakers through the ceiling, and a stereo preamp. I had a Japanese stereo preamp, but I blew it. I turned on, blew it, so I got 2 Macintosh 275s to run the system. It's great. And how does it sound? I don't know yet, but it makes the street lights dim, and that's what I'm looking for. So walk in a house one day, and the carpenters are working, and they're putting a plate in the wall, and it looks like an intercom set, and it says on it, Taco. That's the name of it, which even a child can understand. And I said, what is the purpose of Taco? They said, well, you can talk to people in the other rooms. I said, well, that's not the answer. First of all, it's waist high. You can't reach it. You have to lean down and say, send up more steam or something, And besides, I don't live with anybody. Who am I going to talk to? So I run in the other room and answer it, right, if the key is That isn't, how long can you keep that up? So it's a fantasy. He said, well, why don't you put it at your door? We'll put a microphone at your door, Carpenter said. And then when people ring the doorbell, you don't have to answer it. You can find out who they are, see. And then they ring the bell, and then you talk on Taco, and you say, who are you? And you find out a little bit about the person, what they think about politics and art and religion, philosophy. And then you could have, if you know anything about psychometry, you could construct a curve of their interest areas. Well, you're right. You could find work for them. You can't do anything with it. People ring the doorbell, and you say, who's there? And they say, it's me. So I figured the only answer is to get a camera. So I tried to buy a camera from NBC television. It cost about $88,000. And you can't do that. And besides, you could never mount it above the door. Closed circuit television, like, they use at the post office to find out if you're shaking people's envelopes for money, something like that. Okay, now the phone rings, and it's Otto Preminger, who has asked me to make a movie called Advise and Consent. So I go over to the studio to talk to him because I've been signed for this picture for 8 months, and he keeps casting it, and I don't know what I'm going to do in it yet. All we know is it's a picture about chicanery at the federal level. And, of course, it has no relation to fact. It's merely a fantasy of what could happen if we're not on guard. So I went over to find out what the parts are. So I found out that the president in the picture is played by Fran Chatone. The Secretary of State, the nominee, is Henry Fonda. A guy who testifies against him at the Senate committee is Burgess Meredith. And the senators are Walter Pidgeon, Don Murray, Peter Lawford. Howard Hughes, who gave you The Outlaw, presents The In-Law with Peter Lawford. Or no. and Lou Ayres is playing the vice president. Gene Tierney is in there. All these people, and he hasn't got a part for me. So I said, why can't I play a senator? So he said to me, quote, deathless quotes by Otto Preminger, because nobody in the audience would believe anyone would vote for you. So you know what makes him, he isn't really arrogant, but what makes him one way is because he made a picture called Exodus, see, which is going very well, and is now down to drive-ins. 3 hours and 47 minutes. That means it's somewhere between 12 and 1. Those 7-year-old kids are climbing out of the back seat of the car in their bathrobes, you know, right? Rubbing their eyes, saying, let my people go, right? So, now, Otto Preminger. So, we leave the, now, see, but you know, there are a lot of jokes about him, like he's arrogant with actors. It's not really true, it's just folklore. That even on this picture, there was a Time magazine had a rumor that several of the actors were going to sign a petition against him, but they were afraid because they have relatives in Germany. That's what they say about him. Yeah, well, it's not like that. He's a good guy. So we leave the studio and we're talking, and he says, where are you going? So I said, I'm going to search for the perfect woman. That's the way I talk. It's left over from school. It means I'm going to try and get a date for dinner. So he said, he gave me a long talk about the advantages of family life and children, but he said, you must never let children interfere with the adult community. They must have their own community, but you must supervise their nutrition. How do you do this, sir? He said, you have a closed-circuit television set. That's what I did, and I could watch my children eating. So I said, where are the children? They're grown. Where's the television set? It's in the garage, right? How would you like to sell it? Yes. So I bought the camera. I still haven't got the part in the picture. Now I buy the camera, and I go home and I say to the carpenters, put it over the door with 2 floodlights. And when people ring the doorbell, we'll plug this into Channel 8, which is a free channel in Los Angeles, and we'll see who's at the door. And if it's somebody I like, then I can let them in. And if it's somebody I don't like, I don't know, maybe I'll light them badly or something. I'll think of something. So I'm sitting there, and I'm reading the speeches of Castro, which were smuggled into me by this bookstore that handled the Tropic of before. So anyway, I'm reading these speeches of Castro, and I hear a car coming up the hill. So I look outside, and it's from the post office. It's a special delivery, and there's this guy driving it, and it looks like a student working there. And he turns in the driveway, but I don't want to just look at him. I want to see him on television so I can believe him. So he rings the doorbell, and I turn on Channel 8, and for some reason, I'm getting a ball game from another city. And somewhere between the shortstop and the pitcher, there's a guy from the post office with a letter. So I pull him through the door, and I sign for a special delivery, and he's wearing a new post office uniform, which no longer has the Pony Express. Remember that? That was considered dated. The new symbol is a student working there at Christmas. He has that. Right? It's very good. He's throwing the mail away because of the pressure of finals. Right? So I'm leaving, see? So I'm talking to him, and he says to me, I'm not going to pull around a bunch of advertising in a sack. What a drag. I'm making $1.50 an hour, and this is not the answer. I'm trying to sign for the letter now. And he told me a whole bunch of things. He said he was going to be an electronic engineer, and he worked for the Atomic Energy Commission, but he had to quit to go to work for the post office because he didn't have any money to continue school. And this is all while I'm signing. And he said, that 50 megaton bomb don't scare me. Because this is obviously not an English major, this young man. He says, that don't scare me. He says, we've got a neutron bomb. I said, really? And he said, yeah, we're going to drop it on the 12th of next month from a B-52H because they're modified to carry it. And the 2 crew members have to give up their places to make room for it physically. You like this? I'm still signing now. And he says, we're going to drop it in a neutral country. We figured that'd be the best effect. I said, I see. And I said, you seem to know a lot about it. He says, I was right there when he was building it. I was on the project. Like that? That's a nice way to start the day. Then he left. I still don't know what he did on the project. Probably in charge of security, right? So that's what he said to me. See, he's gone now, post office employee. Now I open the letter, and it says, Ladies' Home Journal, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It says, we would like you to write an article for us on why women should vote. See, because I'm a political oracle. So it said, call us. So I call up, and I call the managing editor, whose name is Green. The guy gets on a phone with a cigar in his mouth because I can't hear him. And he says, Green here. You like people that answer like that? It's kind of English and hostile at the same time. So I said, listen, Mr. Green, you don't know me, but you wrote me this here letter. And he said, wait a minute. I know you. and I want you to write this article. So I said, are you sure you want me? Because it's a ladies' home journal. So he said, I said, I've worked for Time and Playboy and a lot of magazines like that. He said, yeah, we're trying to bring the ladies' home journal up a little because these were his words. He said, just because a woman is married and at home, she's not dead. So I said, I don't know you, Mr. Green, but I like you. You're all right. So he says to me, well, he said, I was brought over here to bring the magazine up. I said, where'd you come from? He said, Sports Illustrated. There's a bowling editor there. He was the night bowling editor, so which is a specialized but highly sensitive department. So he said, now, will you write this article about voting? I said, no, I'm becoming an actor in advising consent. I would like to write an article about women, but not about that. I'd like to write about marriage. So he says, you would? I said, yeah. So he says, were you ever married in case we're challenged legally? I said, yeah, I was married. So he said, all right, good, very good. And we'll get clearances on that. You think about the article, kick it around, and I'll check with you. So I said, good enough. And he said, okay, right. And we hang up. That's about 20 minutes later, and the phone rings, and he says to me, how's it coming? Do you know that pressure? I hate that pressure. So I said, well, it's not coming too good. So he said, what are you doing, putting it on tape? I said, no, I haven't started it. So he said, well, have you got any plans about starting it? What are you going to do, dictate it? I said, I don't know. He says, do you type? I said, no. He said, didn't you take that in school? Now you can see the conversation is really crumbling now. I said, no, I was training to be an executive. So he says, you don't have very good work habits, do you? So I said, well, I think it's the fault of our schools. So now the conversation is really disintegrating. And we're talking about Kennedy and the public school program. But this is what I meant by the fault of our schools. See, when you join the Peace Corps, for instance, you know, they don't have any money to give exams. They have very little in the budget. So the Peace Corps sends you the questions and the answers. You grade yourself, you know. Right? That's all right. If you can be trusted if you have good work habits. Now, I went to a large impersonal university, and I have terrible work habits. Like, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, my mother had a birthday. So I sent her something through the mail. I don't know, a giraffe or something. But anyway, I sent her, what's the difference? It's just guilt. So I sent her this package, and I had to make out, I went to the post office, I had to make out that insurance slip. And it was a girl next to me making one out. And because of bad training at the University of California, I found myself copying her slip. You know that? Bad work habits. All right. So more of that later. They also should teach you to write letters in school. They don't teach you how to do that. Every time I write a letter, it opens up with everything I have to say in the first line, and then it loses interest on the way to my signature. That's right. I'll tell you how, see, they teach penmanship, but not how to write letters. You know how this, in other words, a serious student is somebody who has a fountain pen instead of a ballpoint. That's serious. The problem, see, I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, I made a joke about the General Electric executives and price fixing. 11 of them going to jail, and I called it the GE case, you know. Do you have anything to say to this court? Yes, progress is our most important product, right? So General Electric sent me a letter. They said, there are 27 electrical firms involved. Why do you misinform the audience and call it the GE case? We want a retraction, and don't verbalize. We want it in writing. So I got to write a letter. It's a big challenge now. So now I'm writing the letter to General Electric. And this isn't a bad letter. If I could get with somebody in the faculty, I think they could help me rewrite this. It's got a lot of meat in it, but needs help. Dear sir, I call it the General Electric case because your company is first with me. That's a little, yeah, it's saccharine, see, but I didn't want to lose them. Whether I buy an FM radio or an electric coffee pot, that shows I know their whole line, see. I always reach for GE products first. Now, that's not bad so far. It's not a masterpiece, but it's fair. Now, this isn't bad either, but there's something wrong here. This needs to be reconstructed. Always reach for GE products first. You might as well have the best. After all, the prices are the same. Yours truly. Now we're going to write the article, right? So I called back Philadelphia, and I said, listen, I got to have some help with this article. Get me a secretary. But don't get me a stock chick, because it's somebody who has no interest and just takes shorthand. Well, we got a girl for you. This girl goes to Stevens. I said, really? Yeah. She used to go to Bennington. I see. Very good background. Girls' schools. This is what he said to me. He said, this girl, she goes to school and we have her work for people like you in the summer to give her a feeling of reality. Really? That's marvelous. So thank you, Mr. Green. I want to identify her because I don't want just any girl coming up to my place, right? So he said, her name is Catherine Lewis, and she's 5'7.5", and she weighs 108 pounds. She's arriving by mail, I gather, right? So 108 pounds. So, wow. So he said she'll be up tomorrow at 1:30. So I can hardly wait, right? So 1:30 now, as this T-Bird is coming up the hill. Typical chick's car, black leather, white car, right? The other seat, terrible, next to the driver's because of a dog scratching it, and a box of red Kleenex on the seat. You can't tell if your nose is bleeding, I gather, right? And she comes up to the door and bounces out of the car, and she's got her keys, and on the keychain is one half of a medallion, which some fellow has somewhere and is honoring, I hope. So anyway, she rings the doorbell, and I go to Channel 8 so I can see her there. And they're running the original version of Mutiny on the Bounty, which is, the crew is fighting in this scene because they don't want a woman on board. It's bad luck. Yeah, and there's this woman on board who's talking to a guy from the post office. They're standing up front. So she comes in, and I shake hands with her, which is the worst with women, you know, it's because I don't ever know what to do when I meet them anyway, because I don't want to bow, because that's decadent, it's European. And you have to fight them all the way. But you can't, your relationship hasn't grown into anything rich, so you can't touch them. But if you shake hands with them, their hands don't work for shaking. Have you noticed that? Their hands are broken or something. Are you suggesting they're genetically inferior? No. Maybe if they wear gloves or something. There's something wrong. Anyway, so I shook hands with her, and she kept tossing her hand through her hair. You know that thing? It's supposed to be charming. You know? Sometimes she'd do it on the left side. That's kept me interested. So she, you know, I got through with all these chicks in school. So she sits down and she says, well, let's go to work. And she's got this Easy Eye green papers, elementary school credential, right? Easy Eye, and the pencils, about 86 pencils, you know, very productive. So she says, well, shall we get going? I said, yes, take this down. A woman who demands equality renounces her superiority. So she says to me, what does that mean? I said, well, it means that women aren't secure in their own gifts. She says, you mean they try to be men? I said, oh, no, they're not that brave. They just don't want to be girls. So then she said, what does that mean? So then I said, it means they're competitive. So she said, well, you wouldn't be interested in a girl if she wasn't competitive. So then I said, why don't you write a rebuttal of this when you finish typing it? So she said, well, mighty male, you don't want to be challenged on your own ground. And walked out the door. But I mean, really steaming, you know, there's smoke coming out of her nostrils. She's gone. And she took these cigarettes. In fact, as I recall, they were my cigarettes. Well, the court would have given her that anyway for the time she spent with you. So, right? So, marriage. So she's out the door now, and really out of her mind, you know, hostile. And she gets in a car and leaves about 6 feet of rubber with the bird, you know, and dumps it in low range, 6,000 RPMs, down the road. And this chick, you know, and a guilt set in. I forgot how mad I was. And a guilt set in. I thought to myself, this girl's going to kill herself. She's going to wrap herself around a pole because of me. That's the worst, you know. And, or maybe she won't wrap herself around a pole. Maybe she's going to become a nun. I know she's going to do something radical, you know. Right? I better call ahead and warn the other nuns. No. She's gone. So she's driving, so I got guilty. So I thought about it all afternoon, and then I said, well, I'll call her. Of course, until you go into psychoanalysis, you don't know why you're calling them. See, you think you're trying to help them, but it depends. You don't know why you're attracted to people. When I was a graduate student, I always thought I was in love, but it was always a girl who could type. You know that? You don't know? I know. So anyway, but I haven't figured it out yet. So I call her, and she picks up the phone and says, hello. So I figure, well, at least she hasn't rammed her car into a tree. She got home safely. So I said, listen, got to be aggressive, right? I said, listen, I'm sorry if I upset you, but I think we have a bad chemistry going here because I have a tendency to be insensitive to the feelings of others, and I'm not discriminating when I'm, you know, I have behaved badly, whether it's a man or a woman, but I have a tendency to be expedient because I got to get this article finished. I'm under pressure. And that misunderstanding has been compounded by the fact that you are hostile. And although I call everybody hostile, a lot of times, I think you're hostile because you've had a lot of bad relationships in the past, and you found that hostility is the only direct way to deal with your problems. So she says to me, "Who is this?" So I said, listen, I try another approach, romance him, right? I said, how'd you like to have a drink, of some dinner, and we'll talk about this article. I have no intention of going ahead with this article. I don't know if I ever want to do this kind of work again. Oh, really? What are you going to do? I don't know. I'm going to change my life. Like that? Not, it's interesting. When a guy says he's going to change his life, he's liable to do anything, grow a beard and go to study agriculture in Afghanistan, That's it. You know what women are doing? Then you call them and say, what did you do today? You changed your life. Well, this afternoon I refolded all my sweaters in new plastic bags, and their aims are a little different. So I said, well, listen, I'll come down and pick you up, because they all dig that, right? Feminine. I'll pick you up at your place. So I come outside and I jump in my car and I drive down the hill. At the bottom of the hill, there are 2 police cars. You know what happens in small areas? The police stop and talk to each other. They become lonely. Just as humans, you'll find, if you study their behavior. Right? The great thing is to drive up to 2 police cars and say, who stopped who? That's always good. But anyway, they got a radar trap out there, and you can tell. They got that fork in the back, that metal fork. And I want to tell you about this, because a couple of years ago on a record, I told my audiences something which I consider very irresponsible. I said, to jam police radar, take the tinfoil from your cigarettes and put it into your hubcaps, and it'll jam police radar. Which it'll do. That was before the Kennedy administration and this mobilization over Berlin. So now the tinfoil will jam police radar, but I feel it only fair to tell you it will also send a Bomark missile to the Arctic Circle. So, JFK. As Winchell points out, no less an authority than Walter Winchell, President Eisenhower is 71 and plays 18 holes of golf a day, and President Kennedy was 44 in May and is usually seen in a rocking chair holding his head. Now, I wonder if there's any wisdom. Oh, boy. Well, I tell you, we finished the article. 88 pages single-spaced. And this girl and I, our relationship grew into something richer, right? Boredom. No, it was really terrible. And well, she's the wrong kind of chick. She learned her, her morality from her mother and her business sense from her father. That kind of bad compound. Anyway, I sent her back to school. That's the last I saw her. We sent the article into the Journal, and the Journal prints it up, and I have an okay on it, see? So they're going to put it in the Christmas issue, right, which goes in now. So we're on the tour, and we go through Philadelphia Friday, and they give me the copy. And this is brilliant. What a great organization. Here's the whole article, and the editor says to me, this article stresses that you talk about relationships more than you talk about politics. So there's a picture of me at the top of the article, and this is what it says underneath. For the first time, he deals professionally with sex. Right? Well, no. Actually, it's not the first time. The first time was at the University of California in Berkeley 9.5 years ago. I was a TA in the math department. That explains my lack of humanity. I was in the math department. And we were pretty bitter then, because we had no government subsidy. We didn't know where math was going then. So there was no way to crack the field, after all, Pythagoras and all those guys, right? Anyway, so here I got this class of pre-meds, right? The young doctors. And well, you know what they're like. They're all sitting there, 250 of them, and they're thinking, well, I'll do my internship, and then I'll marry this girl, and her father will purchase my tools. You know what they are. So terrible. And a lot of guys who got washed out of med school who go on to become salesmen for Abbott. That's what they do, is pills, so they can be in the field. The last resort is just to be ill. That's not the best way to be in the That won't necessarily get you in the field either. It depends on the area of social welfare and the conscience of your community. But anyway. So these guys are sitting in class with me, see, these brilliant young men. And I got a great subject for them. I'm teaching them in calculus. That is, I get $75 a month for this, by the way. Teaching assistant. I'm teaching them that as you approach an object, you're always halfway to it. And as far as the math department is concerned, we don't care what other people think. We're very insular in the math department. And whether you're here, until you reach that object, you're halfway to it. So these guys, I know you'll find this hard to accept, but they weren't very interested in this. And they're talking in the aisle and exchanging sandwiches for lunch, trading. So I really getting drugged. So I thought to myself, I think I'll compromise and resort to sex. So I went into class one day. See, put it in terms people understand, teaching method. And I went to the blackboard, and I drew a couch in a blackboard. And then I drew a girl sitting on the couch. And then I drew a guy on the couch. That got everybody involved. He had really worked with these guys as a teaching method. And he is moving across the couch to the girl. And he's halfway to her, we explained. You know, and you have to put it in positive terms. You have to give young people a note of hope. In other words, my class knew, I don't know about the rest of the department, but my class knew that eventually the guy would reach the girl, see, in the math department. That's important, see, because in the philosophy department, he'd never reach her. Right? True? Or in the psychology department, he discovers she's no good for him anyway. I was going to say, what's the purpose of a university? It's to give Richard Nixon a place to work, right? No, Senator Goldwater is a conservative, and the only other thing is he's from the West, but that never stopped anybody. It used to, it doesn't anymore. And he's a member of a minority group. But since the election of President Kennedy, that doesn't stop anybody, correct? Right? So Time magazine tells us that, because you have to document everything you say at a university. Time magazine tells us that Senator Goldwater is Jewish, but he's an Episcopalian. So I admire someone who's Jewish and does something about it. I have more to say about this later. I've been in Europe most of the summer, and I was there I went over there to work, because as you know, the president said, don't go to, he said some things since then, by the way, but I'll get to that. He said that he wants us to, things are going well, because when he was elected 9 months ago, you recall, the choice before us was, we're going to have a war or we're not going to have a war. Remember that? And that has now been reduced to, what kind of a war are we going to have? Well, I had to go to Europe largely because of a girl who said to me, you've never been to Europe. She's very accusing, girl I know in California. So, from Pepperdine College. So, it's a good school. You don't have to choose a major or anything. They're all sort of together there in this kind of bullpen there every day. So, with guards in the towers. So, I went to Europe, but you're not supposed to go because the president said, don't let an outflow of gold go out there. And that would mean you'd have to go over on a Fulbright or something like that, or any other opportunity would be the Peace Corps. You could go over that way, couldn't you? So, yeah. Goodbye, dear. Don't forget to write. Anyway. I know, it's cruel, isn't it? But that's all right. So, she's still in the Peace Corps. It's okay. In an American possession. So, I decided, the president said, don't go. And if you're going to go, you should work over there and take money out of Europe, see? So, I got a job with the British Broadcasting Corporation to produce a 1-hour special for them. And I flew over there, I remember the day well, in the middle of July. So we get into London, and it takes 9 hours and 22 minutes from California, no stops from LA, and we land there at the airport and can't get out of the plane because of demonstrators who are there. Now this is before the Russians had resumed testing, as you recall, and regardless of the protests of Steve Allen, the Russians are testing. So the Russians had not, we were testing, or we were going to test. Anyway, these British people are at the airport, a couple of hundred of them, demonstrators, and they're standing there with signs. And I'll just give you the best signs, not the worst, but some of the good ones. They all say, better red than dead, and go home and take your bomb with you. And that means me. It says yank on these signs. And like that. And one sign said, I don't want to be incinerated so that the West Germans can rearm. That was one of the better signs. So someone who doesn't understand the problem, obviously. So I didn't want to get out of the plane. So this chick comes up the aisle who works for the State Department, and she said, I'm Miss Ridgecraft or Switchcraft or something. And she says, I work for the State Department, And I don't want you to think this is typical of the British people. These demonstrators are just a bunch of crazy kids. And I'm looking through this porthole, and there's people out there like Bertrand Russell. all department heads, you know. And see, you don't have to do that here to be a department head. You have to be published, I think, isn't that it? So, I think it used to be. So, now we go into London under protection of the American Embassy. We've got this girl there from the embassy who's kind of aggressive. And career chick, calls her own cabs and everything. So we get into this English cab, and British people are all throwing cabbage at me and everything. And it's interesting, even in their passion of being anti-American, they're throwing mostly like surplus food. You know? Interesting? That's like when a guy said, "Don't send tractors to Cuba, send Edsels, because we have a lot of them." Well, some kook, you know, in a Democratic administration said that there's an agricultural concept of surplus. But anyway, so that's what they say. The Republicans are always saying, why is everybody going to college? There won't be any working people, right? Now there are a lot of working people, aren't that many jobs. It's a kind of a Hindu wheel of life. But anyway, so now I'm in London, and I'm going to do the show. I notice there are no Americans in London. And I look all over the streets, and there are no Americans. The last American tourist was President Kennedy. He was the last one, they say. And he had gone over there to settle a problem in West Berlin, you recall that. And he met personally with Khrushchev, which he's ready to do if it's necessary. And you remember those pictures of them taken together? And it looked like, Dad, may I have the keys to the car? But so, and the answer was no. That's the problem. Well, so I'm going to do the show now, right? And I find the British are somewhat anti-American. People are stopping me on the street and saying, you're out of touch with our problems. And old women are always stopping me. You're out of touch with our problems. And I thought that, you know, yes, we are. And we only get a statement on the first of every month, but we don't know any of you personally. So now the Russians are pretty cool because they know that we don't have any Americans in London, so they took advantage of this for a propaganda play 3 ways. First thing they did was they opened up an industrial exhibition of 3 acres or more with all their inventions, which is free admission to the British. And it had cutaway Sputniks in it, you know, industrial design. And Vostok 1 was there, and Yuri Gagarin appeared there. They had him there to discuss it at 3 and 9 every day. He was there. And they had, it's pretty wild, they had a mechanical heart that pumps blood between these 2 unrelated dogs. Otherwise unrelated. And they had, it's wild. And then the day that the thing opened up, see, Gagarin would make these appearances. And then the day it opened up, Titov went up. And he was sent up that same day. So that's a pretty good thing to have going. That's what the Russians had going. And then to balance that, the United States had me in London doing this television show. I agree, it's not the best. So we, now, the problem, see, is that the British Broadcasting Company is carrying Titov in the capsule, which is shaking the British up pretty good, you know. And they don't carry anything about our space program at all. We sent Saturn up today, but if you get a British paper, it'll always say, Americans in feeble attempt at space. That's a typical British headline. They're very anti-American. So Titov is up there now, and they're carrying it on radios. And people are walking around the streets with these Japanese transistors listening to him. And Titov, you have to remember, you know, like Gagarin, is not a hero. He's a cosmonaut, but what he really is a lab technician. In other words, you know, he's locked in there, and and he's got those dials, and he's reading them. And he's writing it down on a knee pad, you know. So Gagarin did as he was told. He wrote it down on a knee pad, and he was cool. But the Titov was out of his mind. He got very emotional when he got up there. And we heard him on the radio. You later saw the quotes, I think, but we heard him live yelling. You know, he's up there yelling, "I'm an eagle." Remember that? Terrible. I'm an eagle. So the United Press gave the background on Titov and said he had been an Air Force captain living in typical urban conditions in downtown Moscow, which meant he had a family and he lived in 5 rooms with 3 other families or something. Right? So he was overwhelmed at being alone. So he's yelling. Anyway, meanwhile, I'm in the studio and I've got, well, my problems are a microcosm of the world situation, but they're my problems nevertheless, and I have to face them. So with something besides hostility. So here's this audience, which is direct, I admit. Here's this audience, they're a British audience, and they don't know any of our values. They don't know President Kennedy, for instance. So you can't talk about him. but they know his father. You can talk about him. And, yeah, people would ask for him on the street. People would stop me and they'd say, "How is he? He left during the war." There's a lot of that. So, very exciting. Now, when we get off the air, and we've got our own problems, of course. By the way, you may have noticed that Hurricane Esther headed up the coast a couple of weeks ago, and the headlines in all the papers said, "JFK tots flee in peril." Remember that? Hurricane's peril. And you had an image of those two kids running, from the elements. Right? So, no, I guess the little girl would carry the little boy. He stood up this week. That was in the paper, too. And isn't that exciting? Front page. It's 11 months and he stood up in his crib. A Russian dog is going to graduate school. Yeah, I know. Anyway, so now the president had, but it's all working well so far now, the show. So, I mean, briefly. So the president's father left Hyannisport, see? And, no, he didn't leave. The rest of the family left because of Hurricane Esther. That's what the paper said. Everybody left the Hyannis compound except Joseph Kennedy. And then we gather that the hurricane avoided him, right? If it was smart. So, all right, now where are we? Oh, yes. Now back to our point. So now the show is over, and I'm going out to mixed critical reviews, and I'm going to the alley, and this girl is waiting from the State Department, and she says to me, "I want to brief you before you go out there. The British press is waiting for you because Titov landed already while you were on the air, and it looks like it's successful. He went from Berlin to Honolulu in 41 minutes, and we're going to try and cut that down a little, and say he didn't really see anything or something, but it's going to hit the free world hard. So when you go out, cool it, because you're an American. The press will bait you, but don't be arrogant. Be self-possessed, and don't be defensive, but don't be overly confident. And congratulate him, but don't act as if we don't have something cooking at Cape Canaveral, right? Which they haven't even told us about, I gather. So I'm going out now, and she gave me a speech by Stevenson to carry with me. So I saw him. I got to tell you about that. I saw him in Chicago. So. Now I'm walking outside, there's about 16 reporters standing there, and they ask you very rude questions if you're an American, and you have to cool it. You mustn't become hostile. And dumb questions. Well, I'll give you an example. Like they say, "Are you going to see Gagarin?" No, I'm a kind of an Alan Shepard fan myself. Are you going to the Soviet exhibition? Yeah, but I don't want to go on any of the rides. Now, while I was in London, see, I wasn't totally dedicated because it doesn't take an hour to do, what I just told you? It doesn't take an hour, and I was there for a month. So I met this girl there, see, and who was a kind of a folk singer and sort of a hillbilly kind of, but an American over there. And I had met her in London at American Express. That's how you meet them. I thought in Europe I might find the perfect woman, and they're all American girls at American Express. And you put notes up on the wall, "Desire companionship," and then American girls answer it with a note usually. So because they're cautious. Anyway, I met this girl, and I met her very aggressively. It was a weird relationship, except it was stock because they're all like this. Except you think it's weird. I just walked up to her and I said, "Who are you?" I always do that. It works very well. Anybody. You just say, "Who are you?" I have to know who you are. It's very good. See, it's a good opener. Except you can't sustain that level of excitement. See? So, because later on the chicks start complaining that it isn't, the relationship doesn't have that much drive anymore, and you have to remind them. You say, "You're taking a lot for granted. After all, I'm the guy who ran up to you and said, 'Who are you?'" See? Then they always say, "Well, you never do that anymore," right? And then you have to say, "Yes, and I still don't know who you are." Anyway, so I left her by shaking hands, and I said, "I'll see you," which is different from "I'll be seeing you." And I left and flew to Berlin before the wall went up, and went via Lufthansa, the Germans' reconstructed airline, into Berlin. So I land in Berlin, the same thing happened. You remember those British old women? Now we're in Berlin, and the same old women are chasing you down the street, and they're saying, "You're an American, you've got to do something, the free world, what shall we do?" And the Germans have got all this stuff staged for you. Even if you stop for coffee on the sidewalk, they have people crashing through the wall, with their cars. They drive through the wall there, and people say, see? Or, I'm telling you. Or a kid will go by going to school with a lederhosen and the books on his back and a bike, and a tank will be taking him to school. And these German women say, "You going to let that happen? Or what do you think about that?" And I say, "Well, it's just like home, madam. Where are you from?" "Arkansas." "No." It's wild. So I'm walking around Berlin now, and all these German women are jumping on me. "What about the free world?" and everything. So I devised a technique to get rid of them. I'm not saying it'll work for you, but if you're going to sightsee, people got to leave you alone. So when they'd run up to me, I'd act like an official, kind of like a cop. You know how to act like a cop? Act like a detective. Like if a woman would run up and say, "Got to do something. Got to get the Russians out." I'd say, "Just a minute. And you take a pad out of it doesn't matter what kind, just take a pad out of your coat and a pencil. And say, "What's your name, lady? And where do you live?" Right? Right. "Now, what is it you want me to do?" "We want you to the free world to get the Russians." "Just a minute, not so fast. I'm going to get all this." "You want me to get the Russians out of Germany." I see. Now I'd like to ask you some questions, please. Yes. How did the Russians come to be in Germany initially? Now I want to know where the action is. So I say to the waiter at the coffee house, "Where's the action in West Berlin?" This is no answer, talking to this woman. So he says, "Go to the Brandenburg Gate." Because when you ask about action there, they're talking about, the Cold War. That's what they think about. So I go to the Brandenburg Gate, and I walk... So I go to the... I wondered why they never took it the other way, but... So... They're really dedicated. So I get to the Brandenburg Gate, and here's... Well, some towns are pretty tight. You need CIA to help you. But, I'm going to talk about CIA in a minute, because the president's got a wonderful new appointee, and I thought we'd all give 3 cheers. Named John McCone, who is possibly worse than the one they had before. And this is a good... Do you know this organization? They have their own foreign policy. Which sometimes coincides with that of the United States. Not often, but... They're wild. And I just got through working in Washington in a movie called Advise and Consent. I'm in that. And I did a lot of sightseeing in Washington. And there's a sign there which... well, I think it says everything. In fact, I don't have to say any more tonight. This sign, it says, it's a road sign, directional. It says, "Central Intelligence Agency, keep right." So now I'm in Berlin, right? Okay. So I'm in Berlin now, and I go to the Brandenburg Gate. And I walk up there, and our soldiers are on one side, and the Russian soldiers are on the other. And then in front of our soldiers are the West German police. And in front of the Russians are the East German VOPO. And then in front of the West German police are 4 or 5 teenagers, West German teenagers with the Africa Corps caps, their older brothers. And in front of the East German VOPO is a water truck. You saw that in the paper. So the German kids, the West German kids, are yelling epithets across the gate about freedom there, which loses a lot of it in the translation into German, I found. But anyway, they're yelling this. And they're throwing rocks. And I want to make this clear tonight. Our soldiers, or the West German soldiers, didn't throw any rocks. Sometimes one of our soldiers would hand a rock to a West German who would hand it to one of the kids. And wouldn't throw them. So these 5... I stand there all afternoon. It was the dullest. And these 5 West German kids are throwing the rocks through, and a water truck is shooting at them. It was a lot like the Newport Jazz Festival.